thanks for being here on time. We'll get started now since, everyone's here. How's everyone doing? Good? Cool. You can hear me. That's good. Yeah, in the future, we'll kind of experiment with how we start off, but I was trying to save y'all from having to do like the awkward Zoom small talk thing, which is fine if you want to. But yeah, I appreciate y'all all having your cameras on and your mics on. It's just good to be able to see your faces during this lecture time, while we're especially getting to know each other a little bit more. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen and going through kind of the schedule for this morning. It'll be a little bit different than normal. Some random thoughts for some of you. If you have AirPods, just beware. Sometimes it's really hard for me to hear you, or maybe your partner. So just something to think about, just confirm with your partner or not, because Sean used to use those all the time for his audio and it was hard to hear him. So just a quick side note, because I know some of y'all got some. All right, I'm gonna share my screen and we will get going here. Let's see here. All right, so same thing as before. All right, so this is today's schedule. It'll be a little bit different than what we'll normally do because there's a lot going on. In the past, we have had, and Sean will talk to you more about this afternoon. In the past, we've started off this day a little bit different. We normally have Sean doing a lot of background lectures on the fundamentals of computing and how the internet works and how code works and all that kind of deep dive, really computer science type jazz. And it takes several hours for Sean to get through all that. He has graciously recorded all of that content. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be asking you guys to watch that. It's nothing that's going to prevent you from being able to do anything, but it's really good background information for the why behind a lot of what we're doing. So I'll let him speak into that more this afternoon at 1 whenever he's with you all. I think he's here just kind of saying hi right now. But so instead, we have allowed ourselves to be freed up more, to have more time this week. Normally this week is a pretty stressful week just because there's a ton of stuff going on coming at you really fast in the beginning. Next week slows down a little bit. In fact, I'll share this with you a little bit later. I created a chart last week. It's something we always joked about, like a chart of stress based off of the week of the program. And I always made the joke that whenever we had our first kid, my wife, because she likes to read a lot and she's a good researcher, she bought all the parenting books, right? And one of the parenting books had this chart that showed literally by week if the baby would be happy or sad. They actually had a storming, a storm lightning kind of icon, or a sunny icon, depending on how the baby would be doing. And if the baby was really fussy, she'd get out this little chart and look at it and be like, oh, well, the chart says that he's fussy, so it's no big deal, right? Because it's how it's supposed to be. I think it was, and she did eventually too, baloney. But just knowing that that's the way it was supposed to be made it better for her. So I'm going to share this with you guys in a little bit, so you'll see oh, wow, week 4 is really, really difficult. Well, Aaron told me it was. So I kind of, braced myself for what that is. And we'll explain what we mean by difficult. It's not difficult for the sake of making your life hell. It's difficult because you have to lean in a little more, maybe work a little harder than you would have to otherwise, because it's just a more difficult concept. So week 1 is sort of moderate difficulty. It's not the most difficult that we'll have, but it's not the easiest either. So just be kind of aware of that as we go through. But hopefully we've solved some of the extra stress by giving us more time to work on some of these things today. In just a moment, I know it says 9, but I'm going to go through some tips and thoughts. This is something that we normally do at orientation. We decided to break it out into today. Sean has some other things too that we normally talk about at orientation. Just for the sake of being online, we took a little bit more time on other things than we would normally. So I'm gonna go through just some general tips and thoughts of getting started and what your thoughts should be, your mindset on the program. A little bit after that, and by the way, these aren't hard times, so we might get this a little mixed up. At 9:15, I'm gonna go through Intro to JavaScript. Those of you who've done the prep course with me, might have seen me talk a little bit about this. I'm gonna use that same presentation, but we're gonna go deeper. Just wanna give you a full background of JavaScript specifically, right? We're gonna be teaching you how to program, but as we know, JavaScript is our main learning tool. Thankfully, you all know JavaScript, which is really cool. You may not know it deeply, right? And you may not be expert level, but we're gonna talk about all the context of JavaScript. And then we are really gonna be diving in the next couple of days to JavaScript. We're gonna break after that at 9:45-ish. And I'm gonna give you this video. In the past, I've sent it to you ahead of time, but I think it's a really great way for us to kind of break up the Zoom time today to give you about 30, 40 minutes. It's like a 25-minute video to watch about the event loop. And I'll explain why I want you to watch this when we get there. But the main idea is I want you to understand exactly how the JavaScript engine works, right? How the computer's reading JavaScript. Because if you can understand how the computer's reading JavaScript, then you can understand JavaScript a lot better, right? In a more foundational way. And we'll go over that. At 10:20-ish, we'll come back and I will introduce like your first actual lesson. I'll show it to you in GitHub and kind of walk you through it. Then after that, we will break out into our breakout rooms for pairing. So I'll kind of coach us through all of these things as we go and figuring out, I sent invites to you all really early this morning to GitHub to give you access to curriculum. I went ahead and pushed up the first couple of lessons. I'll show you how to accept that invite and get going. So normally this would be a little different. I would just talk at you for a few minutes and then I would set you loose. But it's going to be a little bit more broken down and a lot more hand holding. So feel free to jump in, ask questions. There's lots of grace, for communication. One thing, I think we'll learn quickly is use Slack as much as possible. I know I've got a few notes from some folks that y'all have emailed me or something. My email box has like 160 emails. And I don't know if I plan on going through those today. So Slack is always a much more efficient way to communicate and, it gives you direct access to us. So definitely get in the habit of using Slack. So there's a few more things like that we'll go over. For some of you who had different environment issues with Atom or GitHub or whatnot, we'll resolve those over the next couple of days as we go because, you'll be prompted to utilize some of those things moving forward. Cool so far? Any initial thoughts or questions before we dive in here? Cool. Well, happy day one. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. It's I don't know about where you're at, but after a little storm last night, the skies are beautiful, blue skies. So it's a good day to be locked inside on a computer. All right. So these are my kind of big picture tips and thoughts for you as you embark on this journey in Project Shift and really this journey to doing something significant. I think one of the things that we recognize, and I hope you recognize too, is that this is going to be one of the more stressful periods of your life. And probably up to this point, I don't know where you come from. You perhaps have had, tragic things happen to you. And I don't mean like it's going to be a tragic experience, but what I mean is it's going to be stressful. And part of that stress is just the fact that you're here, right? I mean, getting here is sort of 70% of the way to success because you've made the hard decision to probably quit your job or leave whatever you're doing. You've taken some kind of risk to be here. And so you're all kind of in this position where you're in transition. And transition can mean a lot of things. It can be a point of extreme vulnerability where you feel vulnerable because you're not really there yet, but you're not really where you were before either. It can be really exciting because it can mean like a lot of big changes are ahead and there's a lot of opportunity. So just know that we understand that you might be a little fragile depending on the day or week and recognize that in your classmates as well. We're all kind of coming from different positions and things might be hard. So I'm going to kind of go through all these bullet points and just talk about some thoughts that I hope will help you. Number one is just fighting cynicism, right? Which is this idea that at some point, something's not going to go well, right? And it might be your fault. It might be my fault. Regardless whose fault it is, just fight that tendency to be cynical. I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, especially, like I was cynical about all of my education. In college, I was cynical a little bit, but as you get older, like you're here because you want to be here, right? If there's something that goes wrong, just communicate with us. We're probably going to drop some balls, especially with this remote thing that's happening. But fight the temptation to be cynical and to keep a really good attitude. Own your experience, right? I mean, this should go without saying, but the harder you work, the better things will go. The more you put into it, the more that one of the things that we hear alumni often say, because during week 6, we'll have the alumni panel, they'll come in and some alumni will encourage you. And one of the things they often say, and actually we thought about like, we should just get alumni to like record videos before each week and tell current students like how they should be encouraged and what they should be prepared for in that week, but we haven't done that. So in lieu of that, one of the things they often say is like to trust the process, right? That at any given point in time, it might feel like, how am I going to get from A to B? And one thing we'll talk about a lot oftentimes is we open loops, but we don't close them maybe until a couple of weeks down the road, right? So we might like almost pose this question and you might be thinking about it, but you may not have it answered for a while. So own your experience, have a positive attitude, know that the process has been proven and you have to trust it in some ways. But at the same time, communicate often, right? If you've got anything that you need, communicate. That's our biggest request, is to not let anything go unspoken as far as like feeling lost or behind, or like even emotionally, if you're having a hard time, as much as you're willing to share that with us, it's going to help us be able to help you. So just communicate often. I always try to encourage folks to rest one day a week, when possible. If you work hard and you plan your time well enough, I think you can have a Saturday or Sunday completely off where you don't code, you give your brain a break. Exhaustion's a real thing. You will all go through this period of, I was up late trying to solve this problem and I went to sleep and I woke up and like it was there. And that sounds ridiculous. But it happens all the time. It's because your brain just needs rest sometimes. And the answer might be really obvious, but if you overwork your brain, it's going to be really hard to get there. So you need to get up, take a walk, take a deep breath sometimes, rest when possible. Of course, always need to talk about working hard, like your future depends on it, because it does, right? There is no such thing as the easy button here. There's no osmosis. You're not going to just be here and just absorb coding. No one's going to care that you went through Project Shift. No one's going to give you a job because you came here, right? They're going to give you a job because you can program. So there's no easy way. Like, we're doing things the hard way. We're just doing it in a compressed period of time. So just remember that, that you have to actually learn and you've actually got to put in the work. Just being here and signing on is step one, but it's not everything. Imposter syndrome, you might have heard of this a lot. It's this idea that, hey, I don't belong here. Like, right, you're not a programmer. You don't have a computer science degree. You've never been paid to do this. So why should you have the wherewithal to give this a shot, right? Maybe you're not actually really learning anything. That feeling happens to everybody. It's encouraging that you can hear Sean talk about, after, a decade and a half or so of professionally programming, he still feels this imposter syndrome, right? I feel it all the time. Maybe I'm not actually supposed to be what I am. So it's really real, especially for where you're at. Not everything can be chalked up to imposter syndrome. Sometimes you really are just having a hard time, right? So I don't want to like blanket it, if you're struggling and be like, you're probably just dealing with imposter syndrome, but just notice it's a real thing. And we're here to help encourage you that, hey, everyone started off like this. Like, no one came from the womb and, started programming despite what they might tell you. I don't know, man. I started putting together computers when I was like 2 months old and just figured that I would write binary ones and zeros, right? So that doesn't happen. You won't understand everything, which is maybe surprising. There's so much stuff that we're going to throw at you. We are going to tell you, in fact, you'll see in this lesson today that we have objectives, right? The things that we want you to really know. There's different levels of learning. Sometimes we just want you to understand it and be able to define it, have a conversation about it, right? But sometimes we want you to actually be able to show me that you have mastered this skill. You can write this thing. So you won't understand everything to the same level because it's just impossible to do that. And the more you learn, the more you will learn what you don't know. And that's kind of a scary thing. So it's almost as if at some point things may not get more encouraging because you'll understand the more things you don't know. But you'll have those adrenaline moments. I think some of y'all mentioned that in orientation, and you'll kind of like you just live off of going from high to high, and hopefully those highs are high enough to keep you going through the lows. We always talk about there's sort of two, not to generalize too much, but there's two main types of kind of learners when it comes to coding. What I mean is like beginner programmers. We often see like one or of two fallacies, which is people who just want to strategize, or review, study, take notes, and they never write any code because they want to be at this point where I understand everything so much so that by the time I write my code, I know exactly what's going on, right? It's almost the equivalent of if you're writing a research paper in college, that you spend all of your time doing your research, and not until you think you're an expert will you actually start writing your paper. And if you have experience in writing research papers, you know that that research paper never gets written like that. You just have to start writing at some point. But at the same time, if you just start writing and haven't done any research, you are writing blindly, right? And so the same thing is true with coding. Some of you will lean towards one aspect or another. In fact, one of the things that we're going to tell you, and one of the mistakes that some of you are going to make is when it comes time for the eval on Friday, like mark my words, one thing that someone's going to do is you're going to try and review every single thing that we've gone over this last week, and look at every lesson, you're going to look at every note that you might have taken, thinking that just by doing that, at some point, you're going to figure out how to do the eval. And that's not going to work. It's going to be a waste of time. So don't do that. But some of you just start writing some stuff and it's not going to make any sense. You're not going to be checking to see whether there's any errors in your code. You're just going to be writing stuff, and where you probably need to take 5 minutes and like make a plan first, right? So be careful about this pendulum. Just have that in the back of your mind that you might make one or two of these mistakes. You might lean and kind of go back and forth between either getting into it too much or not diving in fast enough. And we'll probably identify pretty quickly which one you lean towards and help coach you in the other direction. Lastly, I just think I want to express before diving into, like I said, which could be one of the most stressful time of your life, that we're here for you, right? And the more that you can believe us in that, the better. Sean and I started Project Shift not because we wanted to make any money. To be frank, I think we both could make more money doing something different. Morgan's here not because of anything other than wanting to help, and Annie as well, right? We don't always have these perfect motivations for what we're doing. Sometimes I'm just stressed and I want things to be easy like everyone else. But at our core, we started this because we want to help you, right? We get really excited about seeing people transform their lives and make these changes. Sean once told me before we even started Project Shift that seeing people change their lives, get new careers, start becoming software engineers has meant more to him than any other software project he's ever made, right? Which is why he's kind of made the switch. And me too. And so just know that like we're for you. Like at the end of the day, like we care about you as people more than anything. We keep our classes small so that we can get to know you as much as possible. We don't want to create this big thing. We really have no plans of growing and having bigger cohorts, which sounds weird, but we really want to invest in you and know you. And so just remember that at some point, if you're doubting us, recall that we're here for you. And if we make a mistake, call us out. If I'm a jerk, which I'm usually not, but let me know. We're here for you. Any questions on any of these big picture random tips and thoughts? All right. Cool. Without further ado then, let's start. I'm going to keep talking for a little bit, and this is more talking than normal, but just roll with me. Can you still see this? Does it say the history of JavaScript? Okay, good. Zoom screen sharing wigs me out sometimes still. All right, so now that's out of the way, we're going to dive into finally talking about coding. And we're just going to talk about it for a while before we start doing it. But some of you may have seen this, like I said before, the history of JavaScript. Now, one of the things you'll notice we're going to be doing over these next kind of 3 or 4 weeks is almost taking a historical approach to web development. We're going to be looking at technologies that have come before us. We're going to be learning those technologies, and we're going to be applying those technologies to our own projects. And there's a few reasons for that. I always give the example that if you go online and try to learn something like React, right? You can learn it, right? If you know JavaScript, you can learn it, and you take a tutorial and you can write some code in React, and you have a React app, right? I think all of you right now could go watch some React videos and learn React and be fine and build a React app, right? The difference between you taking a tutorial and learning React, right, and maybe like me or another experienced developer knowing React is I know the problems that React is solving, right? I know why in 2014 React started to catch some real momentum because I started working with technologies that came before it, right? And I really understood that those technologies lacked some things, and React was here to help solve and make up for what those technologies lacked, right? And so in that sense, I have a much better understanding of the current technologies because I know what the point of them is. I know under the hood what's going on in a deeper way than you could ever learn if you just took a tutorial. And so that's our aim for you, right? In as much as possible, we want to replicate that experience of what does it mean as a developer to work with older technologies and then see where they lack and then see the new technologies and how they make up for those old ones. And so that's what we're going to be doing with JavaScript. So this first week, we're just learning the fundamentals. Next week, we're going to start working in the DOM. We're going to learn jQuery. The week after that, we're going to keep doing some of that jQuery stuff. Then we're going to do Backbone. And then we're going to do React, right? So by the time you get to React, you've got a really large foundation in like, wow, this is messed up. This part is awesome, but this part's messed up. And you really see how React came into that. So there's that. And there's also this true reality right now that we live, and I think I explained this probably, maybe it was Joe most recent that I was talking to, that we live in the already but not yet of technology, of software engineering, of programming, of web development. Which is that there's all these new technologies that exist, and they're awesome, and that's mostly what you're going to see blogs written about, but yet all the old technologies that have come before it are also important. And so I'll give you an example of that. I think a couple of years ago, Hulu, the website hulu.com where you can watch shows and stuff, they had their whole platform written in Backbone. So Backbone is an older JavaScript framework, and we'll talk about what frameworks are. So Backbone came out in 2009. How come many years later they still had their application running in Backbone? What this would mean is if you got hired by Hulu as a developer, you'd have to know Backbone, right? And the reality is that if a company has their products or part of their website or part of their code base written in an older technology, they're not going to rewrite that entire product just because something else new exists, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. It costs a ton of money to pay developers to rewrite something. And so if you get hired by a company, you might actually need to know the older technologies, right? But anything new that they would build from scratch, they're probably going to need to build the newer stuff. And so in that case, you're going to need to know both the old stuff and the new stuff. So besides frameworks, the first thing that we're going to talk about is different versions of JavaScript and its history, and why you need to know actually a couple different versions of the language right now. And we're going to talk about how we're going to teach you a couple different versions of the language as we go. And you kind of already know both versions coming into this probably, but it's going to be helpful to give you an understanding of kind of our process and timeline for this. All right, I'm talking a lot, but let's go. LaCroix. Got to figure out a way to send you guys some of these because this is like a staple of our life. Oh, there we go. Like that. I can only see 6 of y'all because of my screen sharing thing, but appreciate Ann toasting here. All right, so where did JavaScript come from? Well, like I said, some of y'all have already seen this timeline, but back in the 90s, right, Netscape was king of the internet. They had a vision for a dynamic internet, right? They needed a scripting language. After that point, I don't know if you remember the early 90s. I mean, to be real, I barely do. But I do remember that mostly websites read like newspaper articles, right? There was text and images and links. There wasn't a lot of other things going on the website at that time. In fact, I remember when we got AOL, my mom and I like trying to figure out like every like website we could, like what websites could we go to? I remember like going to like Coca-Cola.com, like, oh, cool. But it was like an article. But Netscape said, let's make it more dynamic and interactive and user friendly and something awesome. So that was kind of like the initial precursor to thinking about something like JavaScript. So Mocha was kind of the precursor to this, was integrated into Netscape Communicator, which was an early web browser, and it was soon to be renamed LiveScript. So script was part of it, but it wasn't JavaScript yet. In December 1995, there was this notion, because Java had just come out around the same time. And by the way, Java was and is, right, wildly popular programming language. It's what we considered an object-oriented language. We'll talk about what that means this week in deep ways. We'll talk about that. JavaScript is not. It's different from JavaScript, right? Some people start off giving JavaScript the nickname of Java. Completely different language, but they have an association here because at that time, a lot of the web was built with Java. You don't need to know much about Java right now, other than it's primarily probably the most common language that's taught in computer science curriculums, right? Your intro to programming class would normally probably be in some variation of C or Java these days. So there's a lot of, I don't know how you can say it, but really underlying impressions by computer science grads that Java is the right way to program. Whereas probably it's just what they learned when they're doing their computer science degree. It's the first thing that they knew. So they just, everything that they have learned since then, they've based off of that. But anyways, the thing I like to describe here, and I know that some of y'all have heard me say this, is at this point we had Java developers kind of was the more nerdy kind of computer science educated folks. And JavaScript would be for like the edgy designers and novices. And so I don't know if y'all have ever seen the Apple commercials back in the day where you had the Mac and the PC. And the Mac was this guy who was, he was hip. He wore like Chuck Taylors and chinos, and I don't know, he was kind of like the cool nerd, right? And then the PC guy had like a suit and tie and nerdy glasses and everything. And the idea was PCs are for old nerds, but Macs are for young, cool people. Is essentially what they were saying. And that's kind of what's going on here. They're like, the JavaScript wouldn't be for professional developers, but it would be designers and kind of edgy folks with tattoos who make cool stuff. So it doesn't need to be like so steeped in computer science concepts. So this idea has stayed with JavaScript for a couple of decades, and we'll talk about that and come back around to it as we go through this. In 1996, Microsoft did what Microsoft does, and they say, oh, that's cool. Let's make our own version of that and charge people for it. So they made JScript, and they introduced it into Internet Explorer, so another kind of scripting language in the browser. In 97, JavaScript was finally standardized by ECMA. Now, I should look this up because I always forget what it stands for. It stands for something like European Computers Manufacturers Association, something like that. But it's basically this organization. They've existed for a long time, but they came together and said, hey, all these different folks are creating their own version of this language. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. We'll be the governing body for it, right? We'll standardize what it is. So a lot of times you'll hear a JavaScript called ECMAScript, because ECMA is the organization that decides what's part of the language, what are new language updates going to look like. And so finally it was a real language because someone said, this is what it's going to be. So all these browsers can use it, but this is the one language it's going to be. So different developers don't have to learn different versions of it all the time. So that's 1997. Now after that, they started releasing new versions of it, right? So when you introduce a new version of the language, you just add basically new features, right? Think about like some of those functions, in JavaScript, like map and reduce. At some point, those functions didn't exist in JavaScript, but they came out with new updates in the language. So it's just features that come out. ECMAScript 3 came out in 1999. And then there's a few other things that are kind of interesting to know about this history. During ECMAScript 3, otherwise known as ES3, Internet Explorer 5, right, which was Microsoft web browser back in the day, they introduced the XML HTTP request, AJAX precursor. So what does that jazz mean? Well, you know how normally on our website, you click a different button, the website has to refresh to load a new page. But if you're on like Facebook or Gmail or anything else, you just click around and new data gets loaded, right? The page doesn't refresh. And so there's a technology in the background called the XML HTTP request that can make requests to the server, right? Can load new data, can get new data, whether it be new pictures from your friends on Facebook or new posts or new things from the newsfeed. It can make those requests and get new data into your browser without having to refresh the browser, right? So this is gonna be really important. We'll dive deep into this over the next couple of weeks, not this week, but AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, was kind of the technique that was adopted based off of this technology. So we'll go more into it, but that came back in an ES3. This is kind of a big deal. ES4 never happened. So there's ECMAScript 1, 2, 3, then it goes to 5. And I always joke that this is kind of like the 1994 World Series, which I know nothing about baseball. So supposedly the 1994 World Series never happened, and there was a strike, and so it just, life went on. This is what ES4 did. And the reason for this were there are these disagreements between these main two camps. And you can even basically describe these camps as like the Mac and the PC, right? Not actually Mac and PC users, obviously, but kind of like the nerdy, and you know, I'm obviously overgeneralizing. They're probably not actually nerds, but kind of Java computer science folks versus the more like edgy, less educated in programming, designer, scripting folks, right? So they were disagreeing on what the future of JavaScript should be. A lot of folks thought, well, the future of JavaScript should be a lot like Java. It should be object-oriented. It should have classes. It should be strictly typed. And we'll talk about what all that means. Ultimately, no one agreed, so JavaScript stayed the same. 2005, the term AJAX was finally coined. We'll talk more about this as we move forward, but just kind of for the sake of timeline, mentioning it here. And in 2006, jQuery was born. So jQuery happened kind of during the days of ES3 before ES5 came out. And to describe what jQuery is, because you already should know a thing or two about jQuery. We would consider jQuery a library. And I know I've talked about this with some of y'all before. But library meaning as in, if you wanted a useful tool, jQuery could help you by providing that useful tool. But it's not going to give you an opinion on how to build something. It'll just give you more tools. Whereas a framework will sort of give you both. It'll give you tools and a blueprint for sort of how to build something. So jQuery was awesome because it made doing things in the browser with JavaScript significantly easier. And so it was really powerful. And so lots of technologies, lots of websites and apps are still built on the front end using jQuery. The problem with jQuery, as we're going to see really quickly by next week, you'll be pulling your hair out over it, is that you have to write a lot of code still, right? There's no kind of opinion on how you structure things. And so you're going to end up with this just blob of a mess of spaghetti code. And you're going to need a framework at some point. So we'll get to that. That's 2006. So jQuery's been around for a long time. 2009, ES5 was released. Now, if you've ever declared a variable in JavaScript using var, you're using ES5, right? And so ES5 is still a powerhouse version of JavaScript. And the main reason for that is we're pretty sure that in the last 11 years that pretty much any browser someone's going to be using right now, it's going to be able to handle ES5, right? Even if it's like your grandmother in rural wherever, and she has dial-up and she's using Internet Explorer 8 or something, she's probably got ES5 working on there at least, So that being said, and this is one of the main kind of crazy things that is true of us as developers in this modern age, which is when you build software, you're building software that can be handled on any platform, right? Any screen, phone, laptop, computer should be able to view and utilize the software that you're building, right? Because this is 2020, right? When you go to load Facebook on your browser, when you go to facebook.com, you just go to facebook.com and it's all there. And if someone updated it 5 minutes ago, if the developers at Facebook made a new feature or fixed a bug, you have that new feature, you have that bug fix immediately, right? Think back to the days whenever you go to Best Buy and you'd buy software. It's like, imagine that Facebook, updates their website or their privacy policy. You go to Best Buy, you spend $100 and you buy a new little box and you come with a CD-ROM and you load it up. Like, that's not how things work anymore. So with this extremely powerful idea that we can literally build something that could be viewed anywhere and updated instantly, comes this burden of we have to make sure that our code might work on all these unknown devices. So ES5 is a really stable version of JavaScript because we know it's going to work on pretty much all the browsers. And so we'll talk about this more in a moment. But so you got to know ES5, right? So without the cool new features. And by the way, everything's backwards compatible, right? So learning the newest version of JavaScript, you can still use all the old stuff too. So we'll get there. 2009. Then fast forward all the way to 2015, we have a massive update of the JavaScript language, right? It had been since 2009 that anything had come out, right? So 6 years later, June 2015, we have ECMAScript 2015, also known as ES6. So anytime you hear the term, which we're going to use quite a bit just because we're used to it, anytime you use the term ES6, that's just the nickname for ECMAScript 2015 or ES 2015, ES6. All those three of those things mean the same thing. And the idea here is, of course, the previous version was ES5. But in June 2015, they decided we're no longer going to name the new JavaScript versions based off the year. We're going to name the new JavaScript versions, I'm sorry, other way around. We're no longer going to name the new versions based off a number, but we're going to name them based off of the year. So 2015. And then from then on, every year, every June, they're going to make a new release, right? And so this is just to keep things more fresh than before. They had to wait years before there was updates in JavaScript. And something interesting to know, remember how we said ES4 never happened? There was this big debate. Well, the PC types, right? The Java types won out in the end. And ES 2015 came with an incredibly vast amount of features for the language. So something like class syntax, like that keyword, this idea that we'd have classes, it sort of attempted to make JavaScript an actual object-oriented language, which it's not. And we're going to talk about the pitfalls of that, of how the funny thing is no one's really figured out anything, right? JavaScript released this whole new way of using its language by introducing classes. And just in 2018, React, for example, introduced an entire feature that said you should no longer have to use JavaScript classes with our framework because we think they suck. And so it's crazy. No one's figured it all out. So you should feel better about that no one's really agreeing on all these things. So it's kind of a wild world. But so anyways, there's a lot of new features came out, and you as a developer should be really excited about those because a lot of those features are freaking awesome, right? The classes suck, but a lot of the other features are really awesome. And so you should be excited to learn those and want to use them. Now, the problem is we don't know if all the browsers that our technologies will be used on will be able to handle this newest version of JavaScript, right, of ES 2015. And so what we've done is we've built these compilers that allow us to write the new code and the cool new features and all the nice new functions. And then this compiler, we usually use Babel, it's called, for obvious reasons. If you know anything about the early days of the Old Testament. And we use it to compile and transfer our ES 2015 back to ES5. And that means that our whatever we write can be read by anyone else. And so this is kind of a crazy concept, right? If we just have a compiler for it, you can write anything as long as it compiles back into ES5. So that has stopped no one from creating all kinds of insanity. So one of the things which is not insane, it's totally cool, is a project called TypeScript. I don't know if you've ever heard of TypeScript, but Microsoft has, I don't know if they developed it, they've at least adopted it. And it's a way to have stricter typing in your code. And we'll talk about what that means in the future. So the idea is you can write TypeScript, and as long as it compiles back to JavaScript's ES5, then you can use it, right? And so this notion is wild, that it doesn't matter if the browsers can actually handle it at all. As long as you have a compiler that can transform it to ES5, then you can write anything you want. So you have all kinds of interesting flavors of this. There's something called ClojureScript, which is a completely different language. It's called Clojure. But people use it to ultimately write JavaScript. And so, yeah, it's a crazy time. All right, almost done here. Any questions so far? I know I'm rambling. I don't do this often, but. All right, so you have to know ES5 and ES6. And we could probably call it ES6 Plus because, of course, every year a new version of JavaScript has come out in June. Now, thankfully, these new versions are like teeny little features, like maybe a function or something that's changed. So I don't even keep up with them, to be honest. I remember like a couple of years, there was some really cool stuff that came out. I don't know what's come out most recently. I forget what was this last year and what's coming up for this year, but they're really small things that don't change the way you live, thankfully. So I think I stopped in 2017. All right, so that's JavaScript, right? One thing that's important to note here is the two main ways that we use JavaScript, right? Okay, I'll come back to that. The two main ways we use JavaScript, right? I've been talking about it in the browser, and what I mean by that is the browser literally has an engine built inside of it that can understand your JavaScript and respond to it, right? And that's the main way that we write JavaScript. And that's why JavaScript is the language for web development. And it's really the only language that's used in the browser. And pretty much anyone who accesses web applications is using a browser. Actually, everybody, right? The only time that you would access these applications or might build applications, they don't use a browser. If there's a desktop application, right? Something that's built right into your computer, like Keynote or Microsoft Word, right? Those are desktop applications, or obviously native applications for your phone may not be written in JavaScript. With React Native, they actually can be written in JavaScript. So we're talking about the web mostly on the front end. Now, one of the reasons why we've chosen to teach you JavaScript and go into that is because it's also a first-class language for the server side. And so that means we've taken this engine that lives inside the browser, we've pulled it out of the browser, we've downloaded it to our computer, and now we can put it onto a server. Now, a server is a special kind of machine. We'll go over this much, much more. Special kind of machine that can receive requests and store data, right? So now we can literally build anything with JavaScript, and that technology is called Node.js, and we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into that here in just a little bit. And it's this idea that that same engine that lives in the browser now lives in another environment. So when you say, I know Node, it's not necessarily anything, right? It's just, I know how to write JavaScript in a different environment. So there's not really anything else you need to learn to know Node. There's some things you need to learn to build web servers in Node, but the code itself doesn't change. It's still JavaScript, and they still follow the same patterns and updates in the language, minus some small changes here and there. So we'll talk more about Node in just a little bit, but the cool thing is the Node is based off of what we call the V8 engine. And the V8 engine is the name of the engine, the JavaScript engine that runs inside of Google Chrome. Every browser has its own version of the engine that's able to handle JavaScript. And they're all these ridiculous names, except for Apple. Safari's is called WebKit, kind of boring. Firefox's is called SpiderMonkey, which is super cool. So if you create something that's wildly incredible, some kind of technology, you can name it whatever you want, something ridiculous. So, all right, let's talk more about some theory of web development and what has pushed JavaScript progress the way it has in this radical way. And the main answer to this is user experience, right? You as a user of any web application that you use, whether it generates revenue or not, your user experience vastly increases the value of whatever said product is that you're using, right? If it was hard to use Facebook.com, you wouldn't use Facebook, and Facebook wouldn't have billions of dollars right now, right? And be selling all kinds of ads to everybody. So a single page web application, SPA, right? This is a concept you need to kind of just memorize. An SPA is different than what we'd say is a multi-page web application, right? So I gave you this example kind of before, like if you go to like someone like a really basic website, right? About maybe it's like a freelance web designer or a restaurant or something like that. There's going to be like an about page, a contact page, a menu page, something. And every time you click on a new button on the navigation, it's going to refresh the page and load a new one, right? Even Project Shifts are marketing websites like this. Every time you press a new page, makes a new request, loads a new page. That's fine. Now, this isn't a great user experience, right? Because it makes things feel slow. And so one of the ideas is, why don't we just put everything into one page? And you never leave that page. The web never refreshes. And as you click around different things, new things just automatically load. It makes things seem seamless and fast and really, it's a great user experience. And so practically speaking, what this looks like for a developer is, in the past, to build a multi-page web application, if I have an about page, a contact page, and a portfolio page, I can have a file called about.html, contact.html, and portfolio.html. Those are 3 different pages. And if I want to make each of those pages interactive, I might have each of those pages have a different JavaScript file that's loaded. And I might have each one of those pages have a different CSS file, right? It's very modular. It's super easy to just edit one at a time. But if we have a single page web application, we only have one HTML page, and JavaScript is literally doing all the dynamic things to make it feel like we're loading different pages. So as you can imagine, this is an awesome user experience, but the programming side of it is so extremely difficult because you're having to manage thousands and thousands, perhaps, of lines of JavaScript code to make all this work and just sing together like a beautiful symphony, right? And that's sort of what's happening when you have Facebook.com. It's all singing together like this great symphony of JavaScript because all these hundreds of requests are going off the server and you're just never noticing any of it. It just happens for you. And so that's why we have these JavaScript frameworks now. It's because we've pushed the barriers of what the web was originally made to do. We've kind of hacked it together to now have this really great web experience. And we can do that now because we've got faster internet speeds, though the browsers aren't that much more sophisticated than they were, 5-10 years ago necessarily. So this is why, if you want to get a job as a front-end developer, you can make just as much money nowadays as a back-end developer. Because it used to, when you'd say, hey, I'm a front-end developer, it meant you knew how to write HTML and CSS. Now, any designer should be able to write HTML and CSS. A front-end developer is an actual software engineer. They're a programmer. They have to do this junk that's crazy hard. And I think a lot of back-end developers even say what this is all about is even more difficult than that. All right, so jQuery helped us in this process of making these single-page applications, right? Like I said before, it was some more tools, but there was no pattern, so things were more disorganized. So they started coming out with these frameworks. Node.js, by the way, this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now, just in the timeline, came out in 2009. So it hasn't been out forever, but it's been out a while. Moving past it. 2010, October, Angular.js came out. You've probably heard of Angular. Angular wasn't created by Google, but was quickly adopted by Google and now is maintained by Google. And it was one of the most popular frameworks at the time. Same month, same year, Backbone came out, which is what we're going to be learning. You're going to be frustrated by it. Don't worry. It's level 8 difficulty of 10 for week 4. So I'll send you those stats later, though. So Backbone was awesome, but there were some obvious problems with Backbone that we're going to go over. In 2011, Ember came out. It didn't really build off of Angular or Backbone, which is kind of a different flavor. Again, you can make goofy stuff if you create technologies. 2013, people don't really believe that this was actually that long ago that React came out because it took a while for it to gain steam. But Facebook created React internally, and as you'll see, it's basically a direct reaction to Angular and Backbone. It fixes a lot of their problems, which is why people don't really build new stuff with Angular and Backbone these days. 2014, Vue came out, which is actually really similar to React in a lot of ways. March 2015, React Native came out, it's super awesome. If you saw our demo day stuff, I think some students built, like Tatiana, for example, she built her project in React Native, which means that she basically built a native web application or native application, sorry, not web application, using React. And she had to learn just a few different things to be able to build that with React Native, which is really cool. September 2016, Angular 2 came out. Now, this is something that's important to know, and maybe I'm in boring fact land, but you should all be really interested in these facts. Angular 2 is a completely different, absolutely different framework than the original Angular. And this they shot themselves in the foot when they did this. But Angular decided, oh, React is super cool. Let's make something like it. I mean, they wouldn't tell you they said this, but I think this is what they were thinking in the back of their minds. Let's make something like that. So they decided, Google at this point decided, let's make a completely new framework. But since Angular is so freaking popular, let's use the same name, right? And so what that meant is the new Angular was not backwards compatible. So if you had an app built in old Angular, you couldn't use new Angular because of the new framework. So at that point, it sort of gave everybody who was using Angular a choice of whether I want to adopt the new Angular or if I just want to move to React. And in fact, most people move to React, which is why React right now, I think, is is the most popular front-end framework. Vue is pretty close behind it as far as growing in popularity. Honestly, where I want you to be is, I don't care, right? I want you to not care. I want you to use what you think is going to be best at whatever time that you're going to use it. And I want you to be able to walk into any interview and say, hey, I know a couple of front-end frameworks, whatever you guys use, cool. I'll learn that because they all have a lot of commonalities. Learning a new one is not going to be a big deal for you at all. And we even challenge, I think one of our students from, I think it was Cohort 4 or 5, he was like, all right, I'm going to challenge you on that. I'm going to learn Vue for my final project. And he did, and it was easy, and he built something. So I felt good about myself on that. So you should be able to learn any framework. It's just a tool. So that should be your opinion. Bam. All right.